Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica Imperialis and to today's video. Today is going to be a my thoughts on video, and this is going to be my final thoughts on AoS 1. So at the time of this video going live, Age of Sigmar 2nd edition comes out this weekend, and I am exceptionally hyped for that, if you hadn't noticed by the amount of Age of Sigmar content I've been putting out of late. So, with AoS 2 about to come out, same as I did for 40k when 8th edition was about to come out, I wanted to do a video where I looked back on the previous edition, talked about the upsides, the downsides, and give an overall sort of final review of the edition. Obviously, 40k 7th was a very different kettle of fish to 40k 8th, for better or for worse. It was a very different beast, and so you could really comment on different things. But AoS 1, still, I think there is plenty to discuss, and it also... AoS 1 is probably one of the best demonstrators of how GW has changed over the past few years. So, for those of you who are newer to Age of Sigmar, I'll give you a very brief history lesson. AoS 1 came out 3 years ago, roughly give or take a year, or maybe 6 months, after the end of Warhammer Fantasy. The end times happened, the world died completely, they reset things, made a new universe, and Age of Sigmar happened. There was a lot of salt. There is still a lot of salt about that, but that's not what I really want to talk about today. So there was a lot of salt about it, but we got on with it. The game happened. It was relatively alright, and then a year later we got the General's Handbook, which for you 40k players is kind of like chapter approved, only much better. Because it introduced points to the game. Yes, we went a year without points, I'll get to that. It introduced the 3 ways to play that 40k has since nicked. And it also introduced a lot of new missions and known as battle plans, as well as allegiance abilities for some armies in later editions as they started to become a thing. Codices were replaced by battle tomes because, well, they're basically the same thing but slightly different, and the game went from there. We've had several expansions: God Beasts, Skirmish, Shadespire, which is a separate game but within the same universe. Malign Portents was an expansion, and as we go into AoS 2, Malign Sorcery will be coming along as well, and I'm pretty sure I've missed at least one there. So that's the brief history of AoS 1. But what was it that made AoS 1 what it was? So, on the upside, the rule set was a solid little thing. Say what you will about Age of Sigmar's mechanics, but you can't argue they were easy to pick up, they were generally reasonably balanced, they were breakable, but they were, for casual people who just wanted to throw some models on the table, they were relatively balanced. No one army, unless built that way, was insane. They were free, which I think is something that really needs to be stressed. The rules were free and still are free. Not even 40k can say that. The rules were free. And also it was very, in some ways, innovative because it introduced a very stripped down stat line, a very stripped down leadership system, the bravery and battle shock system that has now since been borrowed by 40k as well. It introduced the rend mechanic, which 40k has also nicked to become the AP mechanic, the damage mechanic, which 40k reworked to make its own damage mechanic, the concept of war scrolls, and it also went without points as an experiment. That experiment didn't work, but it was an experiment nonetheless. There was a lot of innovation there that made the game very unique, particularly compared to 40k 7th edition, because 40k 8th edition was another, 2 years off at the time, give or take. It was about 2 years until 40k 8th would come along and nick all the stuff from Age of Sigmar. Then we got the General's Handbooks. Oh, these were so good. These are basically the thing that makes Age of Sigmar long-lasting. The rule set is solid, and it was solid, and it's fine, but it was very easy to just break it. So the General's Handbook introduced the rules of 1, more balanced actual missions, so you could actually play the game with a bit more balance. It introduced points values, because damn it, that was necessary. It later would go on in the second General's Handbook to introduce the Allies Matrix, further allegiance abilities for some armies, and just more and more stuff. It also introduced 3 ways to play, as I mentioned already, open, narrative, matched, and gave scenarios for all of those, including further expansions such as Triumph and Treachery, and going forward we'll have the underground and aerial battles, which is lovely. As I say, it helped to fix some of the glaring balance issues by introducing a loose force organization. So you had a limit on how many leaders you could take, a limit on how many monsters you could take, a minimum amount of core troops you could take, and introduced the concept of battle line, which was obviously very useful. It allows armies to become more regimented and more properly put together, for want of a better word. It did also have one downside, and that it chopped the factions up a lot, and that meant that some factions did suffer because they had basically nothing. I can think of several in my old Elven armies that had this problem, but as armies have come along, they've sort of filled in that gap, and as all the armies get redone or retired, that will cease to be a problem. Then we have the models. Oh, the models. Look, say what you will about AoS as a rule set. Whatever you think about it, the models were gorgeous. Pretty much across the board. The Stormcast Eternals, whether you think they're Space Marines or not, they're not, are very, very nice models. In a certain way. They're not flashy, but they're good models. Khorne Bloodbound, excellent models. Tzeentch, cross-system, but generally pretty damn good models. Nurgle, excellent models. The new stuff for the Elves and the Nighthaunt is just insane. Daughters of Cain, Idnet Deepkin, and Nighthaunt have all got absolutely stunning armies. We've had some new additions as well for other older armies, such as, let's see, who else got expansions? Fireslayers, very, very pretty army Fireslayers, not quite to my taste, but very pretty army. Caradron Overlords, same thing, really cool aesthetic with those guys. And there's more I could discuss if I had the time, like Iron Jaws come to mind for me. And of course some of the older models were brought into those ranges, but beside the point. Then we get to the narrative. The narrative is an upside and a downside. This was a good thing and a bad thing. It really, 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 really was. Because the narrative on day one was awful. As in, it didn't exist. We got basically no context for what was going on. We basically got, okay, there were some realms, then there was some chaos, now there's a fight. It was like a 5-second loading screen to get you into this massive open world game. It just wasn't enough. And the main problem was, to use the game analogy, there were no NPCs you could just go up to for a few exposition dumps here, there, and everywhere. So you just had no context. You just had, here are some dudes, here are some more dudes on the other side, they're going to have a fight now. Which kind of sucked. This was improved over time with the introduction of battle tomes, the expansions, and eventually the novels. I didn't get a chance to read the novels, and I certainly didn't get a chance to read the expansions because I wasn't playing Age of Sigmar much at the time. But they were there and they helped to patch up the narrative. The problem the narrative still had, and still has until AoS 2 comes out, is it was very disjointed, very disconnected. That was the problem I've always had with it. I don't mind getting amazing stories, I actually really love getting amazing stories with great epic battles between heroes of legend and these upstart champions and so on and so forth, and all the good things that Black Library can do, because Black Library are amazing. But nothing felt connected. Like, some dudes had a fight here, and some more dudes had a fight here. Great. How far away were these battles? What links them? Is this part of an overall campaign? And so how did the campaign shift over time? We didn't have a map. And we've addressed this now in AoS 2, but there were no maps. There was no context for anything. All the bits of map we got were isolated things. They didn't link together to create a cohesive foundations. It's an analogy I've come back to over and over again with Age of Sigmar. Its narrative was building a really fancy house, a glorious house, without putting all the foundations in. So you didn't have all the context, all the basis for which to build a universe on, which 40k has been doing obviously really well for the past 30 years. That was the problem that it was having. But the factions it did do and the places it did explore had a lot of flavour. The Stormcast Eternals, I'll come back to them, if you actually bothered to read their lore, were not just Space Marines in a new universe. They were nothing like Space Marines. Realistically, not at all. Just, you need to read it. I know it sucks that you can look at it and say, Space Marines, but no, they weren't. But at the same time, a lot of that cool stuff, all of that flavour, was locked away because you had to go and buy an expansion that most people weren't playing, or you had to go and chug through a series of novels, which, whilst a lot of people are having to do that, isn't always an upside, or you had to buy the battle tome for that particular army. And the core rulebook didn't address any of that, and now the AoS 2 book is addressing that, so all will be well in AoS 2, but that was the problem. We had just no central pile of context. We never had that big loading screen or exposition dump to set us up for the universe. But this did lead to one other upside. Having a very small amount of narrative meant a lot of room for homebrewing. You could do basically whatever you wanted in the Age of Sigmar, especially early on when there was basically no narrative. It's like, there are some realms, there are some factions. If you want to run with this and have a fight, you can do that. If you're really good at homebrewing, Age of Sigmar was your sandbox and your playground, which was great if you were good at it. If you weren't good at it, enjoyed reading about narrative and building around the narrative, not so much. There were some other problems, and I will address those now. The main one being the start. A lot of the things that I've talked about with Age of Sigmar's first edition and a lot of the improvements it made with filling out lore and adding in a lot of rules developments didn't happen very early. In fact, for the first year of the game, as I already mentioned, we didn't have points. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, so what? You basically just had to balance the game for yourself? Yeah, you did. You had to work out a system by which you balanced your own game besides just, okay, here's my pile of guys, here's your pile of guys, we're going to have a fight now. That seems to be what they wanted you to do, but that was never going to work. That became open play. By adding in matched play and actual having points values, you allowed the game to have a competitive scene, which is actually quite strong at the moment, and also just generally allowed players to balance games without having to do it themselves, because that's complicated, because wounds didn't work. You could do some complicated formulae, but you were there all week, or you could, like, say, number of models, but then you just play Ogre Kingdoms and win. It was very, very unfair and very difficult to balance on its own, so having points really, really helped. And the other thing we didn't get at the start was any releases. I can't remember exactly, but in the first year of Age of Sigmar, I can remember, 4, 5 factions getting a book? Stormcast, Bloodbound, although that's been retired in favour of Blades of Corner, that's been retired and will be replaced soon. Seraphon, Flesh Eater Courts, Fire Slayers, maybe Iron Jaws? The release schedule was really, really slow. And a stat that I brought up in last week's top 5 video is there were more codices for 40k 8th edition in 1 year than Age of Sigmar's had in its lifetime. What? More codices than battle tomes. And the game is 3 times older. What? It just wasn't good enough. It really was a really bad start. And combined with the piles of sodium chloride that were directed at Age of Sigmar for killing fantasy and being this and being that and not being this, it really buried Age of Sigmar out of the gate. It had to claw its way back. It was stuck in fantasy's corpse and shadow for such a long time, trying to establish itself as its own game, and it's done that now, but it took a really, really long time and probably soured a lot of people on the game as a result. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I didn't play Age of Sigmar for basically a year. I barely touched it during the last academic year. This year, I've basically gone all in on AoS, but last year, I didn't give a rat's arse. And the year before, well, I was playing it, but that was because it was brand new, and I wanted to try the system out, and I found it wasn't really for me, and then they added in more stuff, but then I was playing against people with new armies, and it was very boring. And it took a long time for me to get properly invested into Age of Sigmar, and I'm someone who had no real prior attachment to fantasy, so I can only imagine how annoying it was for other people. It was a really bad start. I won't disagree with that. They're the main points about ups and downs of AoS 1. Good lore, but it took ages to get it. Gorgeous models, but it took ages to get it. And, they were just... AoS will never be as popular as 40k. I hate saying that, but I am of the opinion that AoS will never quite be more high-selling or more popular with the wide community as 40k. Nor would you expect it to be. I mean, the thing's a tenth of 40k's age. But I will say, overall, AoS was a really, really solid basis. It was a really good start. Well, actually, no, it was a terrible start, but despite that terrible start, it became an excellent system and a viable alternative to playing Warhammer 40k. If you didn't like the formation hammer of 7th edition, you could just go play AoS. There was battalions, but they were far less egregious. You paid for them, and it was generally not too bad. If you don't like all the constrictive stuff that's applied to 40k's match play with the FAQs and the deep strike nerf and the soup nerf and this nerf and that nerf and overly egregious X-Army style being utterly soul-inducingly broken, you can go play Age of Sigmar. There were problems in AoS's meta, cough Zeech, but generally the game was well enough balanced. The top 50 of GT Heat 3 had armies with no battle tomes in the top 10. Clan Scryer made the top 10. Order Draconis, which has 4 units, actually maybe even 3, made the top 50. There was plenty of options in there, and they could still do more, but it was a really, really good place you could go. It was a viable alternative. And I think now AoS 2 will continue to build on that. It had its flaws. AoS 1 had a lot of flaws. Some of them I've addressed in the video, and some of which I probably have missed, that were not addressed during the edition, or which took a long time to be fixed. But it's in a decent place now. It's a really good foundation now that AoS 2 can fill in the gaps in its lore and add more factions, hopefully with a decent release schedule, and be a really solid game. Is it a better game than 40k? You might ask if you're thinking, well, I play 40k and well, it's a new edition, should I give it a go? The question of whether it's better than 40k will probably be something that's incredibly divisive. I think mechanically, I prefer to play Age of Sigmar. I find it's a little bit more free-flowing, but that is without having played much of 8th edition over the past academic year, and it's without playing AoS 2 because the edition isn't even out yet. But what I've seen of AoS 2 in the battle reports on Warhammer TV, which were really fun to snark over, the edition seems to play broadly the same way. So if you like a sort of fast-flowing, low-skill floor and high-skill ceiling, if you've got a nice skill gap and a nice bit of diversity with amazing models and amazing lore, I think AoS is something you can do. Will it be better than 40k? That's up to you. But I think it's really telling that it's even worth discussing. It's in the discussion. Is it better? Is it a good choice to take instead or over 40k? It gets more airtime than 30k, I guess. But then again, 30k is its own sort of game, so I'm not going to bring that up in the discussion here. Anyway, that is everything I want to say. That is my final thoughts on AoS 1. A really nice system that, despite a terrible start, became a viable alternative to 40k that I've really, really enjoyed playing and cannot wait for the new edition. I think I'm more hyped for AoS 2 than I was for 40k 8 in some ways, mainly because of lore, but beside the point. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Obviously, AoS 2 has been on pre-order now for the best part of a week and a bit. It'll be out at the weekend. Are you buying in? Have you bought in? Are you going to wait and see? What are you getting? What would AoS 2 have to do to convince you? What did AoS 1 do right? What did AoS 1 do wrong? Just generally let me know your thoughts on AoS 1 and all of that good stuff, because I'm really interested to see what you have to say, and I always enjoy having discussions about this sort of thing and having a sort of a pros and cons debate. It's really, really fun. So that's everything. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very, very soon with some AoS 2 content as the new edition is looming very close on the horizon, and I can't wait. Thank you very much for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Bye for now.